The newer engines, PW 1100, the LEAP, everything. The cost issue is probably bigger than the time on wing issue.
This is the Time on Wing podcast. Welcome back. I'm Courtney Miller with Visual Approach Analytics. With me, as always, Garrick Deschavant of Collateral Verifications. Garrick, who are we talking to today?
Good morning, Courtney, and good morning to our listeners. We've got another fantastic guest today. We're going to have the pleasure of talking to Ken Newton. And Ken is with Alaska Airlines, and we've known him for a little bit now. I think he's going to be a great guest. He's actually announced that he's going to be retiring from Alaska here in a little bit, but we figured it'd be a wealth of knowledge on the technical side, so we figured we'd get him on. But talking about Ken, he is currently the SCM Engine and Lease Management Director at Alaska. He's had various roles, including Director of Supply Chains Operations, Manager of Repairs Control, Technical Rep, and Maintenance Supervisor. He was also a GM and Production Manager at Inertial Airline Services. He was also an A&P mechanic for Flying Tigers and FedEx. And he's got a BA in Management Operations from the Washington State University, and he's a licensed A&P mechanic. So he knows a thing or two about, the inner workings of things and the technical background. So, which I think is very, apropos. If I'm going to use a French term today, be a little fancy. Apropos for what's going on today, right? I mean, we've talked about it before, but there's a lot of focus on the technical side of aviation. So it's going to be really cool to talk to him. He's a super nice guy as well. So anyway, Ken, this is your time on wing.
Just a quick intermission before we continue with the show. We do get a lot of questions about how our listeners can support the show, and frankly, the easiest way is to continue the spirit of the show, which is just to reach out to us at conferences. But we also run businesses as well, and you can support us by supporting a lot of the work that we do. You can support the work that I do through Visual Approach by visiting visualapproach.io, where we produce a lot of research and analysis, a lot of data visualizations. From
my side, obviously, I focus more on metals, so anything that's aircraft related, if you're looking for valuations, whether it's on aircraft engines, I'm happy to help with any of those types of projects. So we appreciate certainly the opportunities to work with all of you, and we certainly also appreciate just the fact that people are willing to listen to what we have to say and enjoy kind of our thoughts and takes on what we think is a fascinating industry. So thank you.
Okay, back to the show.
Ken, look, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast today. It's always great to chat with you, so we're looking forward to our discussion today. And one of the things that we always do with our guests is we'd love to hear kind of, where you guys started in aviation, where the passion came from. You've been doing this for a long time, so you obviously like it, hopefully. Otherwise, what went wrong? But yeah, we'd love to hear kind of where you got the start from. Where did it all come from?
Well, first, thanks for having me on the podcast. I feel honored to be, with so many others that, esteemed colleagues that you have done the podcast with. So appreciate that. Start off, I know it's been a rough kind of week or so in the industry. So thoughts to all the families of the victims of the recent crashes. And, it comes close to heart with Alaska. It's 25th anniversary of our crash, 261. And I was here for that. So, it's been a challenging week for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where did I get the passion? So it's funny. I joined the Marine Corps when I was 17, and after I took the test, they asked, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, I don't know. And as a kid, I always liked, aircraft, trains, trucks, all that stuff, right? Loved, just for some reason, transportation, big stuff like that. And they asked me what I wanted to do. I was like, well, I don't know. And they go, what do you like? I go, like airplanes. So when I joined the Marine Corps as a mechanic, it was like, all right, let's do something on airplanes. And once I got onto the flight line, right, and you're out there with the especially with the military airplanes, you're out on that flight line, and it just, at that point, it just gets in your blood. And there's something so cool. I was a mechanic, so I would go, and troubleshoot airplanes while they're turning. You're climbing up there or going underneath it while it's turning. Just that excitement, right, of the flight line. And I even today, every time my window looks out and I can see the airplanes taking off from SeaTac, and every time one takes off, I turn around and look at it. It's just one of those things, as you know, in this industry, it gets in your blood. And I think really back then in the Marine Corps, sitting there watching the military planes take off, they're really cool. And even back then, they were still pretty cool back in the 80s. But it just gets in your blood, right? And there's something about this in airplanes and being around them. And I don't know if part of it is the mystique of knowing something that the rest of the people don't know, right? How, especially like how an airline runs or anything, an airport runs, right? Being behind the curtain, so to speak. There's just some kind of mystique about that. And it's just super cool.
What did you work on when you started?
I started on A6 intruders.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
That's really cool.
I left right as the F-18s were coming into the service. And so I never got to work on them. And I remember how the squadron next to us, as soon as they got them, we couldn't steal parts from them anymore because the different airplane, but how electronically advanced they were, and from a mechanical perspective. But yeah, it was a great airplane to work on. It was fun.
And then after the Marine Corps, did you go straight to Alaska?
No, so got out of the Marine Corps, and of course you try to find a job, and it was always funny, and I don't know if it's still this way, but back then, even though you worked on airplanes, you didn't get an A&P, right? And you technically couldn't qualify to get an A&P from the military. And so I've searched and was fortunate to start working with Flying Tigers in the component shop. So my first real airplane part was like a DC-8 landing light was the first thing I started working on.
Okay.
And so I worked with Flying Tigers, and they were purchased by FedEx in '89. And so I stayed in FedEx for 9 years. It was a good company to work for.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So did you know, one of the guests we had on a couple of years ago was Ron Anderson. Did you know him when you worked there? Obviously, I'm sure it was it's not like a small company, but
probably not.
Okay.
Or if I did, I've forgotten.
Yeah.
Ron was out buying airplanes at that time, right? Am I thinking right, Garrick? I mean, he was out doing
in the 90s,
10 deals.
I think at that point,
727, and
Yeah, I was still working as a mechanic, and then I worked on the line or in the hangar, and then I worked in the kind of what they call the project administration, the kind of managing the check flow, every day, planning it out, did that. Then I had plans to stay with FedEx for a career, and had an opportunity to start a 145 repair station from scratch. So jumped at the chance to do that.
Okay. Was that Inertial Airline Services? Was that the?
It was. Okay. It was.
Yeah.
It was. At the time they just had a radio shop, and they a couple of guys had started a CSD shop, but they had no idea what they were doing. They had no experience, right? And I got hired on to help them from the get go, and I mean we got certified, and then about 6 months later they bought my contract out, and I found a job at Alaska Airlines, and 25 years later, here I am.
Wow.
Getting ready to retire from the airline.
So Ken, you mentioned coming out of the Marine Corps, they did the A&P certificate did not transfer, or you would have to continue some sort of training to get the A&P certificate. I'm not to jump to the conclusion here. But obviously, there's a mechanic shortage, there's a technician shortage, there's an A&P shortage. What did it take for... Are you an A&P now? I guess I should ask that question. Maybe you did.
I am an A&P.
What did it take?
What did it take? So, I was able to come out because I had worked on avionics and various parts of the aircraft. I was able to get an FCC license at the time when the FCC license still was there. And so one of the ways, and even today you can do this, was to go under as a repairman certificate. An airline would have a repairman certificate for people working in the component shops. And so I was able to do that. And when FedEx bought us, a bunch of us went to FedEx and said, look, one, we've been working on these parts for a couple of years. We've worked in military on airplanes, write us a letter to authorize the taking of the test. And so that's how we were able to do it, is showing our experience and getting the letter written and taking the test.
And does it require, it sounds like it requires some sort of endorsement. Is it a company endorsement, a corporate endorsement, or another A&P?
You either have to, at the time, you either had to have experience that the FAA believed was directly related. So this was, and it's been a long time since I took the test. I don't know if they still do like dope and fabric on the test. But, back in the early 90s and stuff, you're still having to do dope and fabric and, radial engine stuff.
Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, right?
Yeah. But what's funny is you were doing stuff that you never worked on because, you're a military technician, right? And so having to do that, you either had to show that you had I think it was 2 or 4 years experience, direct experience, for them to accept it, or you could get a company to endorse you, to say, hey, they've met the qualifications, we endorse them, and we authorize, we want them to take the test.
So that was when you transitioned to FedEx. For you, that's what unlocked kind of the A&P test. You transitioned to the Part 145 shop, which did you say was bought out by Alaska, or was bought out by somebody else?
No. So my contract got bought out. So I was hired because I knew how to run a test stand and certify a test stand for CSDs at the time, CSDs and IDGs. So I went in as the GM, set it up, got it certified, and then long story short, the guy that was actually running the facility didn't get along with the owners of inertial, and so they came down and wind up basically doing a management change. Bought my contract out, and did a little bit of consulting, and then got the job up here.
All right, so up here then is Seattle, correct?
Up here is Seattle.
Why then, Mr. Newton, are you holding a Patriots Cup?
Because when you're from New England and you're born just outside of Boston and you live there till you're 12, by the time you're 12, it is ingrained in you.
It's like an accent, yeah.
And unlike, no offense to my West Coast, love friends and all, the West Coast is a little more, iffy on their teams. East Coast, you stay. Patriot fan through and through. Been there, was there way before Brady will be there after Brady.
That's the football equivalent of saying. But that's the football equivalent of saying I was there before it was cool.
Yes, yeah, that is true, and it's fun walking around Seattle. And since the Patriots beat the Seahawks, that's just a gentle, quiet reminder.
Yeah, that's right. Nice. I like it. It's very cool. So, obviously we for those that, maybe don't know Alaska Airlines, which if anybody doesn't, you need to get out of your crawl space.
Yeah, you're probably looking in the wrong place too. It's not really.
Yeah. Absolutely. But why don't you kind of, I'd love to, kind of get your take on, what's been going on with Alaska. What's, obviously you've mentioned you're going to retire, later this year, but, I'd love to hear kind of what through your 25 years there, maybe what you feel Alaska's been able to accomplish and where you think they're going. And I'd love to get your take as much as you can share, obviously, but it'd be great to kind of get your thoughts on Alaska and what you think of it.
Yeah. What do you have to
Sure.
show for 25 years, Ken?
What do I have to show?
Patriots Cup.
A Patriots Cup. That's right. Every day. Alaska, when I got here in '99, was a very different place than it is today. It was, there was some tension still from, even, believe it or not, I think it was the '85 strike. There was still a lot of tension. I came in as a maintenance supervisor, and there was still a lot of tension. And then we had the accident, and then 9/11, and we struggled and tried to really get our footing for those couple of years, and then in 2005 we failed miserably in the summer of 2005, right, for all our customers. And I mark that and that's actually when Ben Minicucci came on board. He actually came on board a little bit earlier than that, but he really was instrumental in changing our philosophy and how we operated. And, so over the years, Alaska has, one of the things that's really been cool about Alaska is the ability to adapt, right? We adapt to where safety became absolutely, after the accident, absolutely paramount. Number one thing, it is ingrained in every one of us. It's so important. And as I mentioned, the accident was 25 years ago. We, leaders went down to the Point Hueneme and to the memorial and stuff. See, and we do this, we remind everybody every year because we never want to forget that, right? We never want to go back to that. So the safety culture that has changed is really amazing of what we do. How, obviously this time last year, we had the door plug. How the airline responded to that. I think a lot of people would tell you that, I saw it in the press and everything of that's the way you're supposed to respond, right? And Ben did the right thing. The teams did the right thing. So watching Alaska adapt and really embrace that has been really cool. I remember years ago when Bill Ayer when we did the 2010 plan, right? That was a big deal. We were gonna get margins like S&P 500, companies, and 10% margins, and everybody was like, "You're crazy. What are you doing?" Right? But that focus, that change really focused the business in how we do business, right? And it changed from just we'll say an operational and a disconnect between operational and finance and things like that to really a singular focused company. And all the teams, all our profit sharing is all the same. We spent years with both the labor unions and management aligning all that. So it's kind of that theory, boys in a boat, you're all pulling the same direction. Your oars are going at the same time. Right. And that really changed the culture and the focus of the airline. There's been times where you scratched your head and you fought, especially in the operational divisions for money and stuff like that. But, when COVID hit, the airline was in a really good spot, right? We weathered that really well. And it was because of that discipline we have. Seeing years ago, it was, we're never flying to Hawaii. We're never flying to Hawaii. Then we started flying to Hawaii. It became a huge part of our business. Then the growth with Virgin America and now with Hawaiian it puts Alaska in a real super exciting time right now with, overnight international airline. I know I'm retiring here in a couple of months, but if I get to see the Eskimo on a wide body, it's going to be super cool to really see that because for 25 years I've been saying we're never going to do it, we're never going to do it, but it opens up an opportunity for this airline to become a major player internationally. Now, there's a lot of risk with that, obviously, because we've grown over the years kind of under the radar in many cases. And, this puts us, head to head with some big players, but keeping the same philosophy we have with, well, we're not going to go put 20 international flights into a destination and compete head to head with Delta. We might put one or two, right? And try to stay under the radar. But it's really been cool to watch that change from a philosophy, and then maintain that through kind of the small company feel, this family that we have, through the merger with Virgin America, and now through the merger with Hawaiian Airlines, is always at the core is kind of the cost discipline, and that family. Really the way we treat each other, the way we treat our guests, the way we treat our suppliers. That's a core tenet for how we operate. And I always hear it's, and some of it could be, just people, trying to blow smoke, but you always hear a lot that Alaska's tough but fair. And we tend to ask a lot of questions others don't. And I hear that from our suppliers a lot. And that's what really Alaska prides itself in, being different in that way and how we do business. It'll be the merger with Hawaiian will be interesting, right? You become an international carrier, you become a larger carrier, you're going up against the top four. It's going to be an interesting 10 years.
What's very different, though, it kind of in the context of what you were talking about, what's very different with this merger is when the merger was announced, the immediate reaction kind of around the country was, makes sense. Which is very different from the Virgin America merger, which was, does Alaska know how to manage a merger? How are they going to do? How are they going to manage our culture, which was still strong at the time? But how are they going to bring these two airlines together? No airline is good at merging an airline. And I think probably the best praise that Alaska can get is that nobody talked about the merger. It just happened. And then we were on the back side of it. So even though now one major difference that I'll have to point out, Ken, is that over the next, during this integration, Alaska will not have a key component that they had during the last integration. And that's Ken Newton. I'm just saying.
Yeah, you're way too kind.
Very true. Very
it
true.
could go better. Yeah. I didn't say it was good.
Good point.
Yeah.
Fair point.
Yeah. So based on that, that's talking about, kind of the mergers, and especially kind of looking at, your current responsibilities and everything else. So how do you handle that you obviously have two, different airlines that operate different products, right? That have different crews, different support, right? So how do you look at that and integrate that so that it works somewhat, seamlessly, I guess, or how to, so that it works, right? From your standpoint, how do you look at that?
So that's we'll say the $2 billion question, right? This one's going to be a little more challenging to Virgin America, and touch it briefly, Courtney, to your point. Nobody really talked about it and whether we were good at it. The culture was a challenge, right? But that was a corporate culture difference, right? Virgin corporate culture versus Alaska corporate culture. This one is culture. This is the Hawaiian people. Their culture is so ingrained. That airline has been around for a long time, just as I think a year longer than we have. This would be a little more challenging. How we look at it. They do business differently, as you said. They operate different metal and different OEMs. It's going to be a learning experience for Alaska, because our traditional model and what we've done and how we've approached our suppliers, and I'll just use the example on the engine space, right? Doing business with CFM is way different than doing business with Rolls-Royce. Your ability to kind of manage the market, manage your pricing is different, right? And so it's going to be a learning experience for that. We're going to do, as everyone knows, we're going to do a single operating certificate, which we should get later this year, but we're going to maintain the two brands. And that's going to be a unique approach. But as we look at the integration of whether it's fleet, maintenance, operations, leverage the expertise of the Hawaiian team, but bring in really, again, a bit of the Alaska approach and what's worked for Alaska, right? From whether it's productivity, whether it's process, business process, things like that. It's really to bring some of that mentality into the experience and skills that the Hawaiian folks have. We are very fortunate to have a very strong balance sheet, and that allows us to really leverage that with our suppliers and what we do and how we negotiate. Really taking one of the big things about the merger that was important was, if you thought about Hawaiian, if you flew from Hawaii to the mainland, then they didn't really have connectivity, right? They didn't really have partnerships, connectivity, things like that. So they were kind of constrained with what they could do. And what we've been able to unlock with both the One World partners and just ourselves is, now if you want to fly to Europe, you can do it through Alaska, right? Or through the Hawaiian site, right? And that, unlocking that for guests is huge, right? That gives them the loyalty, all that stuff. And one of the things that Alaska has always been strong with is loyalty. We have a huge, very strong, loyal following. And to be able to bring that to the Hawaiian team is, we're looking at that opportunity, redeploying metal, increasing utilization, things like that. So when we look at the key challenges, I guess, would be back to really figuring out how do you bring Alaska's business model into the differences with wide body, with international. It's different. It's a different approach. So it's leveraging. We've definitely got to leverage the Hawaiian team and the expertise that they have.
Just on the engine side, I'm looking at, I didn't know what engines Hawaiian had elected, but it's the GENX on the 787. So you are all CFM again currently, Alaska is, and then you'll be adding rolls on the A330s and the 717s. You'll be adding Pratt on the 321s, which you had worked with you worked with.
Well, we had
CFM
LEAP 1As.
Yeah, okay.
We just had the LEAP 1As on ours, on the 321s. Right.
So this will be a first, or not first, because you had the MD-80s, but more recent.
And we had the Q400s, which had the PW150.
PWCs, it's a little bit different, but yeah. It's like a nicer version of Pratt. That's the C.
And that's saying something.
Well, yeah. And then GE. So what's interesting is, just working with the different OEMs, there are a couple different layers here on the engine side that I find interesting. One is just sticking with the OEMs, working with the different OEMs, roles both on the wide body and the narrow body, very kind of unique. And with what is it, the BR7? I can't remember what's on that.
Yeah, 715. Yeah.
The 715s. Yeah,
715.
And then the 700s on the 330 fleet. But I'm more interested on the difference between CFM and GE. Is there any?
There's absolutely a difference.
Right. So how much of a quote new relationship is that? Or is it similar enough that it's not kind of culturally meaningful?
Yeah, the GE so our prime, even in the CFM relationship, our prime contacts are through GE.
Got it.
So there's no difference in the in the relationship there at all, right? It's just a different engine on that side. Now, again, Hawaiian had a different approach to the business, and so what they wanted, so they went with a RPFH right out of the box on the aircraft. That's Alaska's never done that, right? But the relationship with GE is the relationship with GE, right? Some would say
Okay.
that I was I've heard that I was very nice with my fellow panelists the other day at the conference. I was too nice, but
You were not too nice. You were appropriately quiet. Let me put it that way. During the suspect comments from the other panelists, I would say.
Right. Alaska's got a strong relationship with GE. We've developed, Constance, even Safran, right? Constance was over at Safran last week, meeting with the executive teams up there. Over the years, that, as you know, the GE CFM relationship has been a weird one over the years, and Alaska's been pushing them for years to be one CFM across the board, and we continue to do that. It'll be interesting to see if they approach us differently with the Gen X. I would be surprised if they did, right? Because of the relationship we have with them. I think the bigger challenge for us is learning how to work with roles.
Yeah, which is a very different model, right? Yeah,
very different model.
Yeah, and even from that standpoint, even in the two different engine that you have, I mean, those are both very different missions, right? I mean, on the 717s, they're very short missions, right? High cycle versus A330s, which is very long. So then you're dealing with two completely different mission profiles. That to me is fascinating in terms of how do you kind of handle that in terms of trying to figure out how do you manage that pool of engines, that the supply chain to be able to support all of that.
Well, it's the 715, the BR 715. The challenge we're starting to have with that is, the industry's running out of support, right? We're basically, you've got Delta, right? And as the world knows, Delta and Alaska are not the greatest of friends, and so there's a little concern there, a challenge for us there. You're right. We know that our bigger challenge is not how do we deal between the difference in the 700 and the 715. It's that the 717 aircraft is running out, right? And so looking at a replacement for that is a big challenge, right? Because those things, I was talking to a guy the other day, I think they fly 23 minutes. I mean, that's insane.
Wow. Yeah.
There's a reason for that, though, Ken, because that 24th minute puts you out over open ocean.
Right. Absolutely. But when you think about an airplane in the BR 715, it's a pretty good engine. So it just comes off on a regular basis and goes through, and the 717 is a good airplane for that. And so you look at it and go, well, what's the replacement? And that's a challenge. With the 330 and the Trent 700, the good news is it's a good engine, right? And so it's a pretty reliable engine. We have a really good relationship with Rolls-Royce on it and the support. They've gone through the same challenge everybody else does in the industry with turn times. So they've moved a shop. Turn times went worse. How do they support us getting spares? That's been a challenge. They've done pretty well on that. But where we have to get our mind around is this kind of forever deals, right? These forever deals, right? If you were to let an airplane drop out of the program, you really don't have any place to get the engines fixed, right? I think there's one or two shops maybe that can do them independently, but then you're beholden to Rolls anyways. So how we approach that is it's still early on. We're still building those relationships on the Alaska side with the Rolls team, because we've got to figure out where the levers are. How can we, work with them, improve the economics? Like I said, Hawaiian had a different approach. They were more, cash conscious. We'll say need cash now. We are more long-term deal focused, you know, uh, chasm focused, things like that. And so how do you do that when you've got a program like the Rolls, where it's, oh, you fly the airplane, you're with Rolls, you know.
How different is just the wide body versus narrow body in managing those engines? I mean, you're at least 25 years out of practice on the wide body side, at least I would assume. Has it been kind of a structural shift kind of for you personally to get your mind around, well, I guess on one hand, the last generation of wide body engines, and on the other hand, the current generation, thinking of the GENX. I don't know if they're materially different in terms of how you approach that, but how different has that been for you?
I think, I think the biggest challenge right now is just wrapping my head around how the program works with them, right? Again, because I've spent so much time on the GE side, CFM side in those programs, and so it's understanding, the engine itself, right? It flies for X number of hours and cycles, goes through the shop, it's covered, comes back out. Managing that from a commercial perspective, not a lot of difference, right? Outside of knowing you don't have a whole lot of levers to pull. Managing it operationally, where one of the things, as I kind of go back to what I said at the beginning about Alaska, our safety culture, our audit culture, our really focus on our suppliers, having how we do business. We send our team, one of our reps, over to the engine shops when the engines go in for the teardown and stuff. On these Rolls and Pratt's programs, right? You kind of just give it to them and they send it to one of the shops, right? You don't have a lot of input into that. That's a fundamental shift, and that's going to be interesting to see how Rolls and Pratt accept Alaska's view on suppliers and audit and safety and things like that. Operationally, or from a commercial perspective, like I said, there's this contract goes out for so long, right? And you're like, okay, well, there's really not much I can do with it. So just learning, okay, it's more for the next round, we'll say, right? When you think about, are we getting things that we don't need from the Alaska side that Hawaiian needed, right? How do you structure it? Do you go in and do you restructure something to make more sense to how Alaska operates? I think that's all under the TBD right now. And the first thing we have to do is fleet decision. I mean, before any of this, from an engine perspective, it's a fleet decision. But how you manage them from a commercial and operational perspective, for me, it's a little more. It's like starting from scratch, learning, how they built their contracts, right, on a commercial perspective. Where on the CFM ones, I built those, right? So those I know well. Which, if I wasn't retired, it's a really incredible learning opportunity, right? To expand on how to work and how to extract value.
So I
was going to say, when you say retire, is that more like I'm going to still be hanging out doing some stuff just because they might need my expertise, or is it more like I'm out of here, I'm going to go fishing, or I'm going to go do something else, and I'm done?
I don't know if I will do anything for this airline. I'll probably keep my hat in the ring in the industry. As we talked at the beginning, it gets in your blood. It's just such a fun industry. I was at Aero Engines last week, right? And, that's, the industry is small. It's a family, for as big as it really is a family, and it's just fun to be involved in. Like I said, whether I do anything for Alaska, that's for Alaska to figure out. But you'll see me on the mountains and occasionally maybe, still in the industry.
He'll be
On the
that guy.
mountain
Be like,
skiing?
why is Ken still here? What? What's? I thought he retired. But he's still here, hanging out, asking questions.
Yeah, he's going to be the Garrick Dechavanne of technical.
Yeah.
Why is he still
He'll
around?
be the guy. They'd be like, in my day, we did this way.
That's right.
Don't worry, we won't let you be that guy. We won't let you be that.
I'm sure that.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we kind of stop you when you start talking to them. Be like, all right, just hold on.
Right.
Let's just focus on your expertise, not what happened 20 years ago.
25 years ago.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So, the obviously one of the big things that we've been kind of dealing with over the last probably 5 years or so. COVID was the start of it, but I think even before that we were starting to see that. Has been kind of some of the challenges, with the supply chain or with the engine OEMs and all that stuff. And so, as an airline, and I think based on your role where you're kind of managing, it seems like the engine pool, right? The engine programs. How do you deal with that, right? And how do you look at that in terms of all the struggles that everybody's having, and how do you go about making sure that you can still do your day-to-day operations, in spite of all the issues, right? I would love to kind of get your take on how do you look at that on a daily basis, right? Because it's got to be challenging.
It is challenging. And I think there's a couple of, one, we leverage the relationships we've had with the suppliers over the years. As I talk about us being tough but fair, we're not Delta. We're not pounding on the suppliers with a stick, right? We're tough but fair, and we've been able to leverage those relationships to help mitigate some of the impact. The other thing, really, it's about planning. It's about adaptability and planning. We are, hyper focused on, from an engine perspective, when I work with the M&E team, there's a lot of balance, and we're ahead of the game looking at talking with our suppliers, and we've been, we've been able to force some of the suppliers to, on the CFM side, look, we're not going to send it to this particular facility because it's not working. We worked with them to get an offload with one of our facilities that does way better. Right, we kind of pushed the issue, and Safran got an offload for them. We went down to Selma, because they had better turn times, right? So we've leveraged those relationships on the components. As everybody in the industry know, Honeywell is a challenge right now, getting parts, and at some point you look at other alternatives, and then when there's a single source, you just really it's just about engagement from our supply chain, our leadership, getting engaged with the leadership of the suppliers to help mitigate that. We've had challenges. We've not grounded airplanes because of supply chain, right? And I think that's important. It's a testament to how focused we are operationally, and how closely tied the business side, the supply chain side, is with our ops teams across the board, whether it's maintenance, whether it's, simple things of documents, print items, catering stuff, right? We are, we look at a difference in our supply chain for probably the last 15 years or so, is we are we have our own group, right? But we're really the business advisors, and so we are connected with those operational units daily and very closely. So we're seeing the problems as they're seeing the problems, and we're able to get in front of a lot of those by doing it. So it really comes down to is, we have a new VP of maintenance. He just started. And he told us the story of something that happened in his previous role, and we're like, well, that wouldn't happen here. You wouldn't be surprised by that here. And so I think that there's a pressure on us in supply chain to know our business. This is actually one of our key leadership tenets in Alaska: know your business. But it's for us to know our customer's business, our internal customer's business. that focus allows us to get ahead of a lot of problems, or at least be able to mitigate them quickly. So we can adjust. And don't get me wrong, our supply chain team, the procurement team, it's been a struggle, right? But we anticipate. I'll just give and I'm sure other airlines do this too. But I'll just give you a example. The other day, the tariffs. We immediately the stuff's going around. Okay, we need to know from our main suppliers, what's coming from these countries. What do we expect to hit? We're already looking at that, right? And trying to mitigate any those impacts, right? And let the airline know what's going on. That's how supply chain works. We're hyper focused on stuff like that.
Yeah, interesting.
I guess really our approach is not. We're not looking at it that differently, and I mean that in the sense that the planning and the management we do with the narrow body fleet will transition to the planning and management we do with the wide body fleet. You may not manage it the same way, but really how we look at it is, where okay, what's your hours and cycle ratio? What's the impact? Where are you going to fly it? When we change the markets, what is the impact of the contract, right? How do you support that? Do you work with it to make sure you have a spare engine in Seattle versus LA? What do you do? The approach is the same. And I mean that meaning it's a piece of metal with engines. They have different characteristics. They have different times, different maintenance requirements, but the planning of that is really the same, to make sure that you know what all those are and you plan accordingly. Even on the narrow bodies, when we merged with Virgin, right? There's differences there, right? On the Airbus side, there was
Sure.
differences in how they flew, where they flew, contracts they had. But we take Alaska's really good at process and planning and things like that. And you take that mentality and you just put it, they're just different inputs, right? A narrow body engine can go, well, they used to go 12 years. Now it's going to go like 6 years. It's going to be really expensive. A wide body engine based on I think there are 6,000 cycles, that's 7 or 8 years, I think, on our 330, somewhere around there. It's just planning accordingly. It's just changing the inputs. And I think that structure that we have with our approach to the business is one of our key success points. And so maybe, Courtney, that's why, when I think of it, I'm not thinking of, well, it's a wide body, it's a big engine, a different engine. I've got to do something differently. I just have to know what the inputs are and plan accordingly.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I guess it's just, you've answered the question sufficiently. I'm most struck by the spectrum from which Alaska is coming from is CFM 56, and some LEAP 1B and some experience with LEAP 1A, but on that CFM side, and which is appropriately and by design narrow. Like, that's the whole point of fleet commonality. The spectrum you're stepping into stretches on both sides. One, those 715s are just different, right? And I don't mean bad different. Yep. They are almost purpose built for the operation in Hawaii. To the Trent 700s, the GENX, again, different,
I'll give you an example,
edge
Courtney.
of the spectrum.
So I'll give you an example. So I joined supply chain in 2013, right, as the director of supply chain. So I had responsibility across Air Group, all things technical at the time, even IT, and which I don't know why they did that for me, IT and procurement and everything. We were just negotiating. We had actually chosen the E175 for Horizon. I had 30 days to negotiate, one, to come up to speed, and two, negotiate the GE special guarantees letter agreement, right? And 30 days to do it. And it was, the CF-34 is significantly different than your CFM 56, right? It's basically a hot section LLP, right? It's more like a Pratt than the CFM. Really, the thing was when I leveraged some experience with some folks, actually worked with some of the folks that we both know to help me a little bit, learn a little bit about it. But it was about learning the engine quickly and the characteristics of the engine and how that translated commercially. This is the same thing with the wide body. The key is learning the characteristics of the engine and then translating that both operationally and commercially. That I go back to that. It's a wide body, that it's a big engine, or even the narrow body, the 715, right? BR 715 engine. It's just knowing. One of the things we pride ourselves is knowing our business. So you learn that and say, okay, now that I know what the characteristics are, when it moves, what's the UERs look like? What's the work scope look like? How do I optimize that? Then I can take that and then go to the commercial side and say, does how Alaska approach it, their build philosophy, does that fit in with the way the commercial side is? But to start with understanding the engine and understanding the fleet, right? That's I've learned. I bet we've had to. I've been working with the Hawaiian team on a couple of extensions on the 330s, right? And I just did 70 airplanes on the narrow body side on the Airbus, right? These are way different. The leases are different. The engine implications are different. How you handle end of life compensation. How the I forget what they call the when it transfers to the lessor from roles for the program and stuff. It's all different. But the key is we've got to understand it to be able to do the right business piece of that. And that's really our focus is learning it. So I guess ultimately, how do we treat them differently? We learn what the character, spend a lot of time learning the characteristics and then approaching it from that. We don't make rash decisions on it, right? Just hoping that, the CFM did this, so we can do this on a Gen X or even a 700 or something, right?
Is there any, or I guess, okay, so we're talking 715, we're talking the CFM 56-7, the Leap 1B, Trent 700, and GENX. Given those platforms today, I'm looking for with this engine, we focus on the hot section. With this engine, the trick is all about the LLP stack. With this engine, it's all about managing D rate and EGT margin. Are you finding kind of these, not points of failure? Not sure I'm asking this correctly, but
I understand I understand what you're asking.
What's the trick?
And so, what's the trick? I guess I'll just do it to the narrow body difference with the 56 and the 1B, right? We spent the last 18 months really understanding the Leap 1B technically as much as we could. It's funny because I remember the first time we had CFM in the building and we were talking about it is way different than what they're saying now, right? We kept driving, so we could really understand it. And so to your point, to your question, a CFM 56, right? You're managing that to run. You're managing it on an EGT and actually a J-hook problem, right? That's how you're managing that engine, right? The BE, we're looking at the J-hook issue and saying, okay, let's put in a program to work the VSV bushings at a heavy maintenance, just at an aircraft visit, so we can get that, so we don't get the wear on the J-hook, right? So we can get longer life out of it. So that's how we approach that. And we approach it that way because we've learned that, okay, there's an issue here. Let's figure out how to mitigate it. On the Leap 1B, as we look at what our first visit is, we have to think about how much time are we going to get to the second visit. On that second visit, how close can we get to the LLP stack visit when it first goes in? So how do we manage that from a work scoping perspective? Now, so we'll do nuances like that. the 700, right? If we're going to increase our utilization on that aircraft, or on the A330, right? If we're going to increase the utilization, what is the implications, and how do we manage that and make sure that we aren't, we'll say, flying ourselves into an issue where we don't have enough engines, right? So it's learning the nuances of that. The 715, that one. I'll be honest, I haven't dove into that one.
Well, in fairness, a lot of the ways you've talked about managing the LEAP 1B, even the 56, the Trent 700 is how you literally deploy the aircraft, right? That tail,
right?
To manage that. There aren't any options with the 717s, right? It's which island to which island, right? Yeah. Is it? Do you want 20 minutes or do you want 25? Yeah.
That's about it, right?
Yeah.
But you're right. And it's really, when it goes back to ultimately the planning aspect of it, and how we manage our fleet and say, okay, what's our line of balance? When do we're really good at tracking when we think the engines are coming off. And UERs, you have to, obviously you adjust to those, but in making sure that we're working very close with our planning department. So maintenance planning, who works very close with fleet, right, to ensure that those airplanes are in the right place. It's about really knowing that engine, the performance, engine by engine, aircraft by aircraft, and knowing, okay, this thing is, we're monitoring, whether we're monitoring an oil, when we think of oil burn, we'll deliberately, when we start seeing just on an airbody fleet, all right, that airplane's not going to Hawaii anymore, right? Until we solve this issue, right? Or we get it removed. We go through a monthly meeting on our engines where we're showing, okay, this ESN, these are the times, the high times, these are the high risks, these are, EGT margin issues, we're troubleshooting this, and we are, the engineering team is laying that out while they're working closely with the engine maintenance team to say, okay, how we're going to plan this one off. So that level of planning is how we will approach the Hawaiian team as well, right? And the Hawaiian engine is to ensure that it's just different inputs, different parameters, but we'll still manage it, even though you have a Rolls and a Pratt agreement that cover most things. The planning of it is still going to be highly focused to ensure that we aren't running into an issue on an aircraft by aircraft basis.
To what you just said, what separates Alaska apart, and I find most interesting, is Seattle from a network perspective. Because if you're looking to optimize engine time, cycles, derate even, to how hard you're working on that engine, you need to be able to move airplanes around, whether or not it goes to Hawaii. Everything in Seattle at some point makes that much easier, right? Compared to like Southwest, operational genius, like incredibly capable, but they have airplanes all over the place all the time, touching different hubs at different times.
So one of the things that maybe, so we treat all our aircraft and engines and stuff the same, and I think we don't sit here and we're not a company that's going to take this engine because it's got low EGT. We're going to move it down to this fleet because it's got less thrust so it could go further. And we don't do that. Right. Okay. And so we manage our ETOPS fleet and our non-ETOPS fleet at the same level. What's different is we may not fly that airplane if it's got an issue with the engine, just because we may not fly it we'll fly it here to LA or whatever. We may not fly it to Hawaii, or we may not fly it to some place where we can't, if we do have an engine issue, we can't change it, or it's a challenge, right? We'll manage the aircraft in that way, but the management of the engines, of the fleet, of the maintenance is the same. And I think that gives us a benefit. Now some would argue that maybe we're we're not optimizing enough, right, in a cost perspective. But I would argue that our ability to do it all the same allows me to be very predictable. And from a commercial perspective, to be very predictable. We're going to do this on this many engines. We know this is when it's going to happen. And so your point about Southwest having airplanes everywhere, if they're managing their fleets different, that becomes challenging. But for us, and this will be different because of the size of the fleet, right? We've been very fortunate with, we have 160, like 140 something NGs flying, 150 NGs flying. We have 80 max now. So yeah, the fleet size gives us some benefit. It'll be different. We only have 14 or 18 321s. We only have 24 330s. That's gonna be a little more of a challenge for us to do that. But philosophically, maintenance wise, we're going to treat them the same, so we don't get into a situation where I've managed the engines to only be in this kind of flow, and all of a sudden something happens over here, and I can't put this aircraft over there.
Interesting,
right? And so that's so maybe that's why we don't treat them differently per se, because we love having the flexibility to move aircraft wherever we need it. That's super important for us, right?
And when you say we move aircraft, are you suggesting the network team, the fleet team?
Network,
network, yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Network and maintenance planning, right? I mean, they're connected daily. Right. And so when we start having, say we're having an engine oil issue, right? If we starts getting into, and everything is risk-based, right? So we use the SMS process, the risk-based process, and then we say, okay, as the risk starts to elevate, we start letting network planning know, okay, we need to either have this engine and this aircraft in a maintenance station tonight, or we need to keep it off the Hawaii routes for, will ETOPS restrict it or whatnot, right? Those type of things to really help manage where the aircraft goes, so we don't get into a situation where the airplane's down for days.
All right. So I've got a question for you. Thinking back, having been at Alaska for 25 years, right? So you were at Alaska when they were probably starting to transition away from classics into NGs. The NG,
right? The second NG arrived when I started.
Okay, so do you remember when you first started having similar issues that the engine, like that the engine on the Max today are having? Right? Is that something that as the NG kind of went into service, right? Did you guys find the same, like similar unknowns, which you're finding today, right? Because I think to me as an airline, trying to manage any new engine has got to be the challenge is the unknowns, right? Because you can plan as much as you want, but if you still have certain unknowns in terms of how much time you're going to get, on the engine, how much is going to cost you to overhaul it, what repairs we're going to see, all these things are still, I think, unknowns. But is that something that you were dealing with when the 7Bs were first coming out, or are you finding that today's challenges are different than what you saw, let's say 20, 25 years ago?
I can't personally speak to the 7B much outside of, at the time I was a maintenance supervisor on the line. I think the biggest problem we had with those were duct splits, right, on the aircraft. But from a cost and an operation, as far as I remember, that engine stayed on wing, right? We didn't have the 7B didn't have this, because it was much, not that different than the 3, right? Newer technology, but we didn't have these type of challenges that I recall. Now, I will tell you, talking with people and working with the 7B over these last 20 years, I think most of us forget what an entry into service looks like, right? I would still say, even with that the new kit engines, the newer engines, the whether it's the PW 1100, actually most of them, right? The LEAP, everything. this is the cost issue is probably bigger than the time on wing issue, right? And so when I think about, like I said, even a CF-34 that spends 6 years on wing, 5.5, 6 years on wing, and then it comes off and then goes back, another 5.5, 6 years later for an LLP visit, it's very predictable, right? It's, and the cost is, you're doing a overhaul and it's not, incredibly challenging. The LEAP, and maybe it's our experience with the 1A. Our biggest concern right now is when we open those engines up, what are we going to see? And I don't know. And you'd have to talk to people with even older than I am that have better experience on the Dash 7 on when it first went through the shops. But I don't recall us having these type of worries, right? That you were going to open that engine up and it could be anywhere from, $3 million to $6 million or $7 million to repair, right? And that's I think a different challenge. And we've talked about this a lot. The new technology and what they did, they pushed these engines to their envelope, and the heat and I think there's just an unknown of what that heat can do to this material and how long it's going to last.
So there are three,
Yeah.
if I can oversimplify here, there are kind of three main categories of cost. There's just the more exotic parts that are just more expensive because they're using more exotic materials. There's parts escalation, and then there's the labor MRO, the actual labor of it. Is it the combination of all three? Is there one in particular? I mean, I know spare parts escalation is kind of insane. You mentioned the cost. How much of that is because of the engines, and how much of that's because of the time? I guess the times.
So I think there's two things that we're looking at. One, the extra engine visit that nobody thought we were going to have. So you've got an extra engine visit. So let's just assume everything is as good as a 56 from a cost and a material perspective and scrap rate. Even just the extra engine visit for $3 million is something we didn't plan. But you add the cost of the material, and this is just because it's an entry, immature engine is the lack of repair, the lack of limits in the manual, things like that. So that material is all going to get replaced at very expensive prices. And so it's a combination of those two things. R&R of an engine, number of engine changes, things like that. I think the fuel nozzle issue has been a huge issue for us. I'm sure Southwest, they change way more than we do. That from an operating perspective, we didn't see issues like that on a 56, right? Where you were having to change out something every 800 to 1,000 cycles, right? But it's really that extra visit and the cost of the material, the amount of material that will need to be replaced, right? And that's the triggers, that we're seeing, and the work scope creep. We've got an engine in there now that's got 3,500 cycles on it, and it's a very expensive engine, and that scares us.
Yeah. So do you see that those issues going away at some point? Do you think that will get resolved, or is that just the new normal of this is how airlines need to adapt to make sure that they maintain some level of consistency with the operations?
So I think I mentioned this last week on the panel. There's a bit of a new normal on these engines. I think once we learn through this first round of visits on the LEAP, once we learn what the engine is going to look like, we can plan for that better. They are going to fix some of the things that the RBS is showing good progress and success. The durability mod will give us just a little bit more time on wing. but the reality is it's going to be what it is, right? For Alaska, we think, even with the durability mod, say our max 10s that get here in the end of 26 or 27, we'll get maybe 1,000, maybe 1,600 more cycles out of them before they have to come in the shop. That's the new norm. I think this engine, to get the fuel burn, that you're going to have that extra visit. It's just we just have to plan accordingly.
Yeah.
And sure, it's more expensive. We were hoping the fuel burn was actually a net benefit to the airline, right? From a cost perspective, but the reality is it's just offset with the cost of the engine. But we have to get there. The industry has to get better in a fuel burn perspective. This is going to be the results. Hopefully they learn from this for the next generation aircraft.
Great segue, because I am very interested in your unique perspective on, let's just use CFM as an example, but we're talking Pratt, Rolls, whatever, GE alone. How would they look at the next engine program, given the context of what they just went through on their last new engine program? Have we delayed the new technology cycle? Do we expect it to come with the same problems? How are you thinking about that today?
So I don't know how they're approaching it. I don't know if it's delayed it per se. My view is what's going to delay it is the next generation aircraft.
Yeah.
Right. The Boeing isn't even talking about it yet, right? Airbus, what are you going to do, right? They're not going to re-engine current technology aircraft, right? And I think that's again, right. And I think that's what will delay it. How they're looking at it, I would hope that they're very smart people and they're looking at lessons learned and trying to figure out how do we mitigate some of this. But I will tell you, from an airline's perspective, we're going to look at it differently. I think we accepted the marketing speak, so to speak, right? No pun intended there. But I think we accepted that and didn't really challenge them enough as an industry. Yeah, it's great. Fuel burn. We can show you the test. In fact, I remember being in a meeting and going, yeah, they're saying 14%. It's probably closer to 12, right? But we're seeing the 16%. So we didn't believe them much there, but we didn't ask them the right questions to understand the technology and the implications of how long they would last. They told us, it'd last as long as the CFM 56, just like they said last week, which it's not going to. There's nowhere, no matter what they do to the engine, I don't see how it does that, right? So I think we will be smarter, where we need to be smarter in the next generation engine is to actually really understand it and the maintenance implications and cost before we make that decision. And so when you think about, does it change how an airline looks at fleet planning? It may have an impact. Maybe I'm going to keep my airplanes a little longer while I dive into this, rather than hurrying up into being the launch customer on the new technology, right? Virgin, or Hawaii was a launch on the ETOPS 1133. We look at, I think Virgin might have been the launch on the 1A. I'm not sure if they were, but I know that, you look at yeah. And so you look at that and say, okay, boy, we ran into a lot of challenges with that. So from an airline perspective, you go, maybe I don't want to be the launch customer. It's very painful, right? Sure, there's some cash benefit when you buy it, but boy, that operational impact and cost was really high for those. So does it change the OEMs? Hopefully. Hopefully they learn a lot. Will it change the airlines? It should. It should change how they look at the next generation.
We've already seen that,
you,
right? I think I said this on this podcast before, but you have large airlines saying that 30 is the new 24, right? Which is another 6 years out of these aircraft. Right. We haven't talked about this, but I don't think it's as appreciated that Ed Bastian's comments on a new Embraer platform were as negative as they were. Delta Airlines will take one of everything, at least, right? Historically. Right. It's largely because they can, and they manage that incredibly well. But that is indicative of what we're seeing across all the other airlines, which is, wait a minute, I thought new was supposed to be better, and while it probably eventually will be that way, we're 10 years into this new technology program. The other grand theory I have, Ken, and maybe you can confirm or deny this, I have a theory that they pitched 14% fuel burn. They're getting 16% fuel burn because 2% of the engines, LLBs, are being burned and shot out the back as thrust.
Well, it does get lighter when the coating falls out.
Yeah,
it does get lighter. Yeah, that's hilarious. So, do you think when talking about kind of the next generation of engine or aircraft, or do you think as from the airline industry, which typically will drive ultimately what the next product should look like, right? And do you think there's going to be as much focus on fuel burn as there is more on predictability? Right. And because obviously I think emissions is always important. Noise is always important. I think fuel efficiency, everybody talks about, the next product should be at least 15% better or 10% better. Do you think that what's happening today will change the minds enough to kind of go, well, maybe, we don't need to do 15, maybe we do 10, but we're able to kind of show, hey, look, we're going to have a bit more consistency in what we're going to provide you, and it's going to stay on wing as long as we say it's going to do, right? Is that, where's the trade-off? Where do you think that could happen?
So purely my opinion, I would say at some point, you're only going to get so much fuel burn. Look, we fly airplanes, they burn fossil fuels until they figure out how they're going to fly 300 people on a battery. You're going to do this, right? I think that realistically, it's going to be more stability cost versus fuel burn, right? Focused, because sure, you can get some incremental benefits. This was a step change, right? The legacy engine to this is a step change. It's going to be really hard to get another step change like that. So you're going to get some incremental benefits. Sure, this open duct, open fan, concept, does that CFMs work? Does that really fly? Were you going to put that on a 777, something like that, right? You look at, okay, how do I get more time on wing? Because ultimately time on wing is cost, right? And so I think they need to focus on how do they improve time on wing on these engines. That's and some would argue that the geared turbofan, once they figure out the challenges here, that will be actually a good concept and a good engine, right? And probably be, maybe better than the LEAP. It's hard to say, right? Time will tell. But, making a technology change like that, I think they're way ahead by doing that, right? And if they can figure out how to make that really work well, I think they'll be way ahead. So, and that's not going to be another step change again for fuel. It's got to be reliability.
This may be stretching kind of outside your expertise here, but I'm interested in the business model of the engine OEMs and they lose money when an engine goes out the door, a new engine goes out the door, mounted on an airplane, and they make it on the back end. Is that model sustainable, knowing what we know today about the challenges we're all having on the repair, the overhauls on the back end, and the costs associated with it? Or is that just here to stay, do you think?
That's a catch-22 for an airline, right? We want a cheaper airplane, right?
The cake and eat it too. I get it. Yeah. I've negotiated with Alaska. I know the requests.
Yeah. And one of the things Boeing did to do that was to push the suppliers to basically give them parts, right? Right. Is it sustainable long term? Probably not. They're going to have to do something about that because the question comes into is, well, at some point, like on the Boeing, either you give us options, right, or you change the model a little bit. But if I have to negotiate with the CFM on all those guarantees and cost guarantees and things like that, CFM is not going to, the number's going to be ridiculously high, right, because of the cost. And so, they're doing that to make up, sure, because they give the engine for like a couple of $1 million to Boeing. Long term, I think the model it'll balance a little bit, maybe a little more money up front because they lost so much in the development. They make it up. Don't get me wrong. You've seen GE's earnings, right? They make it up. There's no doubt they make it up. In fact, the more the engine comes off, they make even that much more.
But it's a perverse incentive in that context, right?
It is. And if you have a choice of engines, well, they're not going to do. Their incentive is to be chosen. And if it costs too much for me to operate, I'm going to choose somebody else, right? So either it's a perverse incentive for a Boeing airplane where you don't have a choice on certain airplanes. But so they still have to make an engine that will last on wing, and they have to focus on that. But they're gonna have to figure out a way given all the issues with the engines, they're spending they're losing more on the entry into service now than I think they ever did. And even though they'll make it up in the long run, they've got to figure out a way to get some of that cash up front. And so that may be just charging more for the engines, ultimately.
Yeah, which means more expensive airplanes at the end of the day, right? So, but if you're paying more up front to then have more reliability on the back end, right? You got to, it's a trade-off at the end of the day, right? Just like anything else, just like the fuel burn trade-off, right? It's, do you want the 15% or do you want the extra time on wing, right? Because at the end, well, we got to burn you in the hotter, right? Which is why you're getting less time on wing. So it's kind of it's a give and take. And it's just a matter of trying to find that, what's that good compromise where everybody feels like, okay, we're not taking it, we're not giving it all away, but we're not, also receiving everything at the same, we're get to give and take.
It is. And I think we would argue that operational pain and CASM impact, at least for a strong balance sheet airline, I'd probably want to pay a little more upfront for better operational time on wing, right? I think that's really, because when you think about, when you think about us with these leaps coming in, that it's shocking the amount of money that the airline's going to have to spend in a 5-year period for this first round of engines.
Yeah,
it's shocking. And so when you think of yields and stuff, it's going to be a challenge.
I mean, consider a new engine program that comes out and they say, we're going to hit all the fuel burn targets of the LEAP. It's going to be the same plus, I don't know, whatever, 5%, doesn't matter. But the real step change is going to be on reliability. The problem is it's going to be 15 years before anybody ever knows if that's a thing. On fuel burn, right away. And so there's this timing offset where, okay, I'll pay you now, but you got to deliver.
Well, and that's where, in order for you to do that goes into your engine agreements, right? On the front end when you buy the engines is how they guarantee it. You need to simplify them because they're incredibly complicated to actually get any money back from. But two, you really need to really strengthen those guarantees because, like you say, it is 15 years out or 10 years out before you know the true reliability of it.
Yeah, no, that's well, it's gonna be interesting, right, to see kind of how that develops, and we probably won't see any of that for at least another 5 years, right? I mean, I don't think there is anything that's going to be earth shattering that's going to come out over the course of the next 5 years. Everybody's still trying to figure things out. I mean, the current fixes are really going to be rolling in starting in 26, but really means 27, 28. And so you'll see the benefits of that probably in, 29, 30. So nobody's going to be focused on, hey, what are we going to do next for a good 5 years?
I agree. I don't think the engine market stabilizes until 2030 easy, right? From a general supply, demand, capacity, flow, maturity, it's easy 2030 before that. And like you say, the OEMs have to focus on getting those to the mature level before they really dive too far into new technology, right? They'll do their R&D, but they've got to fix this in the next 5 years.
But imagine the new program side, if you're at GE, CFM, Pratt, Rolls, doesn't matter. Imagine standing in front of your board right now and say, hey, I need a couple $2 billion to do a new engine program. They'll say, sit down, Trigger. Like, I just don't see it happening. The same thing on the aircraft side, which maybe Airbus, they feel that they need to keep, as a work program for their engineers or something. But even then, somebody's going to ask the question, cool, what engine? Because the last round was all engines. So it's just really tough. One other point before we wrap up, and I know we're getting there. It has been recommended that anytime somebody says time on wing on the podcast, Garrick and I take a drink. There is no way we could have done that this podcast. No way whatsoever. We'd be sheets to the wind.
It's a much different conversation then.
No, very true, very true. I do have one last question, and then I know we do need to kind of let you go, but it's certainly been mentioned through various this podcast as well as some others. But so when you think about your NG fleet, with everything that's going on, right? I mean, there's obviously people have been looking at extending and everything else. How has that shifted that phase out period from your side in terms of do you still look at that kind of on a year over year basis, or have you guys kind of made the decision, look, we're gonna hold on based on what we know, what we have. This is the new plan because we don't want to be caught without reliable products.
Interesting. Good question. Really interesting question. We're parking our 900 fleet, which is just the 12 legacy 900s that we have. We're parking those. The last one parks in September. We adjusted our plan to Boeing's delivery. We were conservative. We if Boeing said we were getting 25 airplanes, we said maybe we're only getting 18. We adjusted our plan because we went through that a couple of years ago where we got just smacked, right? We didn't have enough crews. We didn't have airplanes. And we said, okay, then let's plan better. So from a retirement perspective, I don't think you're going to see us. So our next set will be the 700s. We're looking at, or the 717s and then the 700s. We're looking at a fleet replacement, right? We're not going to extend them just to extend them. We'll plan in advance to take advantage of that because really we look at like our NG fleet and say, okay, there's a large cost to keeping those 700 flying. They run into the second core visits on the engines. They run into the aging aircraft inspection. Look, that's going to happen 4 years from now. So let's plan the replacement. So we're still marching down the path that we've had. We're already talking about, okay, when do the 800s, the next oldest fleet, they're 20 years old. The oldest is 20 years old now. So, do you keep those to 2030 and start doing something there, right? We're looking in advance. We're not changing because of a lack of capacity, lack of aircraft and things like that. So we're still maintaining our plan.
Okay.
I mean, it might adjust a little bit here and there, but like we're doing the 900s first before the 700s, mainly because they just don't fit into the operation as well. And they're 22, 23 years old.
Yeah.
So it makes sense.
How old how old will the 700s be kind of in average when they start to leave?
So they're right now, because we got rid of a couple of them. So they're around the 24 range, 23, 24 years old.
Yeah. So basically
some are a little younger.
Yeah. But, so you guys are looking at, when you're dealing with kind of that second heavy check, you're hitting some pretty big hurdles right on the airplane.
Yeah. So the first one hit, it's aging aircraft about 29. So you figure probably around the 27, 28 range.
Yep. Okay.
Because you got to align it with the check. So, that's when you start thinking, okay, what do I do it? And we're looking at what is the replacement for that gauge right now, right?
Yep.
We're doing those studies now to figure out, okay, what's the right replacement for it? What do we do with we have the 3 700 freighters. What do we do with those? So those are all things we're looking at as a broader fleet plan right now.
Yeah.
There's lots of fleet work going on right now.
Yeah.
Is that
nothing to do with your
27?
retirement, right? You just kind of don't want to do the hard work anymore. You're like, all right, too much going on. There's too many airplanes, too many fleets. I'm out. I'm done.
I'm out. Mic drop. Done.
Is that 27, 28 years for a 700? Is that older than it used to be for Alaska, or is it kind of the same?
Yeah,
still that check. You get the check.
It's a little older. It's a little older for us. I mean, remember back in the classics, we kept those a little longer than we wanted to, just from a lift perspective. Mm-hmm. These, I think, had we not purchased Hawaiian Airlines, right, it might be a little different, because that was going to be when I was working with Nat Pieper for a while, we were talking about the replacement. And then, when we bought Hawaiian, we've got the 717, which is going to say, okay, we got to push the 700 fleet decision out a little bit. So, there'd be a slight delay, but not an intentional, because of the industry, lack of lift, how we focus on things. It's purely from a timing and just what we have to do in the next few years on a fleet perspective.
Yeah. But to me, that alone says a lot about your planning capabilities, right? The fact that you don't feel like you're being caught kind of with your pants down in terms of like, oh, we got to readjust. The fact that you're like, no, we're still on track, even with all the changes, everything else, that, we've planned enough to feel good about it. So that says a lot.
Yeah. And, we really increased utilization on our fleets this year to make up for it. But we have the planning, the crews and stuff, and the technicians to keep the airplanes flying. We have struggles like every other airline, but
right.
For the most part, we've adjusted utilization, and now with the Hawaiian fleet, we can increase their utilization to make up for that. And by we do things like we're going to move 330s between, keep them going islands to mainland, and take out Alaska metal. So now I have, okay, I can make up for lift elsewhere with really moving aircraft around and things like that.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, Ken, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's always fun to chat with you. Obviously, you got a ton of experience with what you do, and so it's always fun to have these conversations. But we do want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us, especially before you're off into the sunset. I know you're not going to go away, so it's off into the sunset for a little bit. Hopefully, you'll take a little time off to enjoy it. But we certainly look forward to kind of staying in contact and continue those discussions. But thanks again for being on.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
Look at that. I learned something new today. That's it. I'm done. I can call it quits. I learned something today. I am done. I can go back to binge watching whatever.